I'm joined now by Aaron McMann from the Ann Arbor News and M Live. And Aaron, here to talk about the Michigan Wolverines, every Ohio State fan's second favorite topic, I think.
Yes.
Boy, there is a lot to talk about. They had a very eventful January and February this year where hit the highest of the highs and then had just this very weird post-championship period where you had the will he or won't he Jim Harbaugh, and you had the string of guys. You knew last year's team was senior laden, but you had a lot of guys leaving for the draft. What was that like? It felt like there was the first outright national championships in 1948, first national championships in 1997. Obviously, that's still going to be special.
Yeah.
Was that a little bit of just a little bit of, I don't know, annoyance after that for fans that it was like, oh, come on, let us enjoy this for 30, 60 days.
Yeah, it's funny. It was probably the appropriate bookmarking for what was a weird season, right? Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Connor Stallion stuff. Michigan's under 2 NCAA investigations. I think the assumption even going into the Rose Bowl and the national championship was that if they were to win and Jim Harbaugh got an NFL offer, he would be gone. I mean, he'd been trying for a couple of years now. Mm-hmm. He just hadn't gotten a team to agree to take him on. Mm-hmm. So I guess Michigan fans probably weren't too surprised given what had been leading up to that. But I think all the fallout, not only Jim leaving, but taking several assistants with him, Michigan having to scramble to find a new defensive coordinator. And at the same time, from a player personnel standpoint, Michigan brought back a lot of guys last year that theoretically could have went to the NFL. Blake Corum, had he not gotten injured, could have left. Several of the offensive linemen could have left. So I think Michigan fans going into last year knew that there was going to be a mass departure. So that probably wasn't a big surprise. But in totality, with everything that went down, I do think fans, there wasn't a lot of time to celebrate just because your head coach wasn't returning. You weren't getting a lot of these guys back. And there was a lot of wondering, what's going to happen now? What's next?
And what was next was hiring Sherrone Moore, which, felt like very logically you're coming off a championship. Why wouldn't you make a continuity hire? This guy just filled in for a bunch of games at the end of the season, won several games. It is rare to hire a coach who has already beaten Ohio State before he's been officially your head coach.
Yes.
But that's what they got. How has the Sherrone Moore era gone? It felt like there was a very slow start in terms of recruiting and the portal, all that kind of stuff. And now it feels like maybe business is picking up a little bit on those fronts.
Yeah, he's starting to find his footing. A topic of conversation this offseason is what this Sherrone Moore era is going to look like, right? Is it going to be a continuation of Jim Harbaugh and the way Michigan did things in the past, or is this going to be totally brand new? And early indications are this is going to be a continuation. I don't see Michigan's offense and mentality changing a lot, especially in the first year or two. You got to remember, Sherrone Moore was hired in 2018 as a low-level assistant coach, tight ends. He worked his way up the staff, eventually got play-calling duty. He coached the offensive line and kind of helped mold this offense to what it became. So I don't think you're going to see a drastic change this year. I think you're going to see Michigan try and run the football, do the things that they were, play that big physical brutality style of play that you saw the last couple of years. So I don't see it changing a whole lot. And Sherrone's in a unique situation. Never been a head coach before. He had no ties to the university or state of Michigan before the job. So he's in an interesting spot because in the past, Michigan hasn't had a ton of head coaches, but when they did hire guys, it was typically guys with ties to the school, whether players or coach before or whatever the case may be. So he's in a unique spot. I think he realizes that. He feels fortunate. And I think he's, in a way, going to try and ride the wave for a little bit of what Jim Harbaugh was able to do.
It's so fascinating that Sherrone Moore and you've got Ryan Day, two guys who, well, they're very careful not to say that they don't like each other. But when you ask them if they like or respect each other, the answer is not. It's not yes. But you go through all the stuff you just said about Sherrone Moore, other than started at tight ends, Ryan Day started at quarterbacks. Everything else you could apply directly to Ryan Day. So similar how, such a parallel path there. That's so interesting for guys who are on very opposite sides and probably not sending each other Christmas cards at this point. So Sherrone Moore's first team this year is, this is a very tale of two cities. It is still kind of the best of times on defense. It is not quite the best of times on offense because you got Colston Loveland back as the only returning starter, and you've got EA Sports cover boy Donovan Edwards, who is certainly put some yardage up as a running back, but is not technically the returning starter.
Sure.
Everywhere else, it's kind of square one in some ways. I think we're contractually obligated on a college football preview show to start with the quarterback. Yeah. So let's start with the quarterback. They've got 5 guys there. It doesn't feel like there's a definite answer among those 5 guys. Alex Orji, safe to say he came out of spring as the favorite to win the job. I mean, how confident are you that he's going to be the starter and stay the starter all season long?
Not confident, and I think that just goes to speak to the uncertainty at the quarterback position. Gun to my head coming out of spring, he is the front runner. Part of it is, I think, just what Michigan wants in their quarterback. Part of it is injury related. Jack Tuttle, the most experienced guy of the bunch, former starter at Indiana, he's entering his 7th season, most veteran of the group, didn't practice in the spring. So the Michigan coaching staff didn't have a lot to work with him. Didn't see him a ton. So I think training camp is going to determine a lot. Yes, I think Orji is the front runner. He does some unique things on the ground with his legs. He's difficult to tackle. I kind of relate him a little bit. He's almost like a poor man's Jalen Milroe. Doesn't have a strong arm, but can do things on the ground. Michigan likes that in their quarterback. They saw that a little bit out of J.J. McCarthy, but I think ideally they would want more of it. Problem is, as I said, his arm isn't the strongest. He's attempted one pass his entire Michigan career. They haven't used him in the passing game much at all. So it would not shock me at all if you see some type of platoon situation early in the season. I know it's not something you probably want, but with Tuttle and his experience and his ability to throw the ball, and then Orji, who I think the Michigan coaches like, but they need to see more out of. They're going to work both of those guys in. Tuttle's problem is he's been injured the last couple of years. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, so I think there's concern there. And then if you were to ask me, watching Michigan's spring game in April, who's the best quarterback of that group, it was somebody else. It's probably a third guy in Davis Warren, from a walk-on, who I think might have the best arm of the bunch, just inexperienced and maybe a little undersized. And you question whether he can get it done at the Big Ten level. Nonetheless, they got them figuring out to do. They chose not to go in the transfer portal this offseason to find a quarterback, something I thought they would try to do. Didn't do it, so they're going to roll with one of these guys out of the group.
And they do have Jaden Davis, who's a true freshman, who very, very highly touted. A lot of people think very highly of him, but he's a true freshman.
Correct,
so you're probably a year away there. Running back, mentioned Donovan Edwards, feels like he's kind of the big answer there. Wide receiver, they lost some production. They lost Cornelius Johnson. They lost Roman Wilson. We saw some Samaj Morgan last year. Where does the wide receiver production come from this year?
It's going to have to be, I think, a group deal there. You mentioned Samaj Morgan. I think Michigan liked what they saw out of him toward the end of last year. He was a big playmaker. Again, he's a little undersized, more of a slot guy, but they do view him as a playmaker. I think they're going to try and get the football in his hands as much as possible. They've got Tyler Morris, a guy who kind of came on again last year, kind of like their third option. They like what he can do as well. But again, another smaller-bodied receiver. They're lacking a big-bodied receiver on the outside. So at least early on, I think you're going to see Michigan try and play within the tackles and maybe in the slot when it comes to the passing game. You mentioned Colston Loveland. I think they're going to lean on him quite a bit in the passing game this year. He's a preseason All-American. He caught almost 50 balls last year for like 700 yards. I think they're going to have to lean on him even more. But Morgan and Morris are your top two. They did bring in some guys from the transfer portal, guys with some experience. C.J. Charleston from Youngstown State being one. So I think they're going to try and sprinkle these guys in, but it's going to be kind of a group mentality here. And then you mentioned Donovan Edwards, who has shown an ability to catch passes out of the backfield. He's just short of, I think, breaking the Michigan record for running back receiving yards and catches. So I think they're going to lean on him quite a bit too, but it's going to be a unit by committee type deal.
Offensive line has been one of the real strengths of this team for going back to the Bo Schembechler era or so. But this year, again, basically starting from scratch. You got really functionally the top 6 offensive linemen are all gone. It's really you lose your top 6 offensive linemen. Yeah. Miles Hinton is back. They stop me if you've heard this before. They went into the portal and they got an offensive lineman. In this case from Northwestern, but boy, it feels like they are kind of going to be piecing things together there for a little bit this year. Yeah,
you mentioned the offensive line being the strength of the Michigan team the last couple of years, and you're absolutely right. They were to lean on guys, not only in their experience and talent, but especially last year they were deep. They went in this time last year. I remember Sherrone Moore talking. He felt like he had legitimately a 10-deep group where he could put in the backups and be totally fine with them playing. That's not the case this year. They've probably got 4 or 5 guys that they feel really good about, and then the collection of guys who I think are still trying to figure things out. So it's going to be a work in progress early on. Michigan last year did a very good job of kind of bringing guys along up front and then leaning and They went through a period where they were injured. They were shuffling guys in on the offensive line, every week because of injury. Like as I mentioned, the depth worked out. They're not going to have it this year. They have to stay healthy, I think, to be effective. And even then, I just don't know what they're going to get out of them. So a lot of guys who have been in the program a while. Some guys have kind of had to wait their turn. But I don't know if the talent level is what it's been the last couple of years.
They are also turning things over on the defensive side of the ball. Jesse Minter off to the NFL with Jim Harbaugh. So now it's Wink Martindale. I got to make lots of fun old-timey game show puns when they hired him. I gotta love that.
Yes.
But he is, sort of from that same Baltimore Ravens adjacent kind of tree as the last couple guys. And the last couple guys have worked out pretty well. Is the expectation that it's going to be kind of status quo, or is because he was with the Giants and he kind of has done some of his own stuff? How different is the defensive scheme going to look this year?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to look drastically different. He came in declaring himself the OG of the Michigan defense of the Ravens system. And it was a natural transition, right? Mm-hmm. You went from a Mike McDonald who came to Michigan in 2019, 2022, installed the Michigan defense, the Ravens way of what they were running, and they handed it off to Jesse Minter, who took the reins and tinkered it. The case may be, but Wink's coming in. He's familiar with the system. He knows what they're trying to operate. Michigan brings back a ton of players on the defensive side of the ball who know what they're trying to do. So it was a natural transition. Yes, there will be differences. I think they've mentioned terminology has changed a little bit. Wink has a track record of maybe blitzing a little bit more than what Jesse Minter and Mike McDonald were doing the previous couple of years. I know that's given some Michigan fans concern.
Don Brown flashbacks.
Yes, Don Brown has come up, yes. Now Wink has gone out of his way to say, I'm not Don Brown. Yes, I am old and I'm white, but I'm not Don Brown. So I do think you'll see Michigan try and blitz a little bit more, but I do think you're going to see very much a lot of varied stuff, a lot of disguising, a lot of zone. They'll use 5 defensive backs like they have been the last couple of years and try and disrupt things. Because, look, Michigan benefited the last couple of years of defenses, of the defense getting off the field quickly and giving the ball to their offense who could march down the field and take time off the clock. And I think they realize that formula works, especially in the Big Ten style of play. And I don't think they're going to go away.
Well, one thing that might help get opposing offenses off the field is they got 2 real good tackles inside on that defensive line, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant. I know there's a little bit of turnover on the outside, but you got two tackles on the inside. You want to keep opposing offenses from being able to run the ball on you. That is certainly a good start there.
Yeah, they're gonna be disruptive up front. Mason Graham's an interesting guy, Southern California kid from Hawaii. Michigan kind of found, and they're a little alert to Ann Arbor, and he's ever since he stepped foot on campus, he's been elite. Jim Harbaugh was raving about him early on as a true freshman, and he's only gotten better. A preseason All-American. He's NFL mock drafts already talking about potentially him being a first-round pick, and then Kenneth Grant, you mentioned, kind of the sidekick, another good player who could potentially be an NFL guy. They're gonna be tough to deal with. If both those guys can stay healthy, ideally from Michigan's perspective, they think they could have 2 of the best defensive tackles in the country. So yes, their teams are gonna have a difficult time running on them, and they do have some depth. Rayshon Benny, who played quite a bit last year, got a couple of starts, injured toward the end of the last year. He's by all accounts going to be healthy and ready to go as well. So I think they have not only 2 tackles they can lean on, but a third I think they can send in there to kind of for relief. Yeah. Now
the edge, it's not quite as certain. They have lost some talent there. They lost some talent at linebacker. I mean, there are certainly questions here. This is a certainly the side of the ball that has more talent, more returning talent, but there's still some questions there. What are there concerns about the edge position, about the linebackers, or is that kind of just sort of the next man up?
Yeah, from the edge guys, there's probably a little bit more concern. They do bring 2 guys back who played a lot of snaps last year, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore. The way Michigan utilized their edge rushers last year, they had 4 guys they leaned on, and if you go back and look at the snap count production, they're all really similar. So, yes, guys were considered starters, but they weren't really considered starters because they're playing equal number of snaps. Mm-hmm. They're, again, another example of Michigan being able to lean on their depth to relieve guys and cut down the snaps to bring in guys that were fresh. I don't know if they have that same situation this year. Stewart will be leaning on quite a bit. Derek Moore will obviously be leaning on quite a bit. Beyond that, depth is a concern. Who are those next 2 guys up? They don't necessarily have answers there. They've been tinkering. They've been using a lot of guys. We'll see where that goes. And that might go back to the inclination of maybe Michigan not blitzing as much as one would think. Linebacker, I think they feel better at. They've got a couple of guys transferred from Maryland, Jishan Barham, who played a lot, started quite a bit last year, and I know they're really happy with him and what he can do. And then they've got another little linebacker from Nebraska who he played a little bit last year. He would kind of used as a third starter, so to speak, that they feel like they can lean on quite a bit. So I think they feel better about middle linebacker than they do at the edge.
Secondary, I think we have to start with Will Johnson, highest rated player of anyone in EA Sports 25. So that's, I'll be interested to see. He's coming, right? He's here.
Yes.
Yes. So I'll be everyone all week has been saying My rating's okay, but I think it's a little too low. I think I'll be interested to see if he has the same thought. I'm sure everyone wants to be 2 points higher than whatever they are. He is about as sure a thing as it feels like. He feels like he is on that track to be lockdown corner, top 10-ish pick next year. I mean, he feels like about as sure of a thing as you can have at the college level.
Yeah, he was another guy who came in as a true freshman, and I think Michigan really loved. They saw the talent early on. He's very good in man coverage. He's a smart player. He's someone I think they were lean on from an early point. And he came live last year. He was a postseason All-American, despite missing I think 3 games due to injury beginning of the season. But he shows up in big moments. He played well against Ohio State. He was named defensive MVP of the national championship game. He's really a really good player. And he's an anchor that secondary who I think has gotten better as the offseason has gone on. They lost a couple of guys one guy due to injury, Rod Moore, starting safety. They lost another safety who was positioned to start, Keon Sapp, to Alabama. But they were able to fill that role, that secondary. They brought in 4 transfers from the portal who guys all with starting experience, guys that played at different levels who can fit in there. And I think it goes back again, the depth conversation. Michigan feels like they want to play with 5 defensive backs, in the game, and I think they believe they've got probably 7 or 8 strong backs there.
So this is a team that is coming off a national championship, but has lost a ton of guys and had turnover and the coaching staff and all that kind of stuff. They have an interesting schedule this year. They got Texas after years of getting gripes about non-conference schedule. Texas is coming to the big house, so no complaining this year. USC on the schedule at Washington, Oregon, home for Ohio State. Home for Oregon at Ohio State. To have the national championship game rematch be on the road, and that's maybe your 4th toughest game, maybe. Mm-hmm. That is a tough schedule. Everyone's complaining about Florida's schedule. Michigan does not have a cakewalk here. What does success look like? What would be a successful season for Michigan this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. That beefed up schedule, I think, largely, aside from the Texas scheduling, is a result of the expanded Big Ten. Right? You've got an insurgent of good quality programs coming in. Michigan's been matched up. Like you mentioned, they have to play against USC. They have to go to Washington. They play Oregon. It's not going to be easy this year. There's no doubt about it. I do think the 12-team playoff helps their situation where they can probably still afford to go maybe 10-2 and still get in, depending on when those losses take place and who they're against. Success for Sherrone Moore year one, and I've been asked this quite a bit actually. I think it's going into that regular season finale against Ohio State and still in contention for the Big Ten championship. Mm-hmm. If they can still be there, whether they're 9-2 going into that game or 10-1, win or loss against the Buckeyes, I do think that's success. Mm-hmm. There's so many questions on offense. I think what fans are concerned about quarterback, who that's going to be, and whether Michigan's going to be able to move the football and run the ball like they have the last couple of years. So I think it's going into that regular season finale in the horseshoe and being still in the conversation for the Big Ten title and the playoff. I think it's a success for them.
Way earlier in the show, you mentioned the Connor Stalions thing and sort of the looming, notice of allegations at some point, maybe from the NCAA. What is the sense from Ann Arbor in terms of what's coming, when it's coming? Is there any sort of sense for this is not as big a deal as the people from Columbus think it is? Or is there concern? Is there just nobody knows? What's the vibe right now?
It's probably a combination of it all. I think a good portion of the fan base isn't worried about it. They're like, whatever. They got their national championship and nothing else matters. Mm-hmm. But I do think there's a worry. Like, what if the NCAA comes down hard on them? I mean, they've already been placed under probation for a separate NCAA investigation for recruiting violations. So if the NCAA determines that rules were broken and it's serious enough to warrant something other than a slap on the wrist, I do think you'll see some sort of panic. But right now, I think it's been largely a celebratory period. Michigan's happy. They finally got their first title since '97. They've won 3 straight games against Ohio State. All is good. And until then, I think they're going to keep celebrating.
All right. Well, Ohio State fans, we know they love to follow Michigan all year. So if they want to follow you, where can they find your work?
Yeah, we're at mlive.com/Wolverines. I'm on Twitter or X, Aaron McMann. We've got a podcast, Wolverine Confidential, Spotify, Apple, all the major streaming platforms.
All right. Well, appreciate it. And see you in November and, maybe back here in December too.
Thanks for having me.